Selner nodded. The director took over explaining. We told Mr. Reed it was dangerous, but he didn't listen. You probably know what happened, she said. Mrs. Selner's voice trembled as she added, strong hunters protecting our world are getting killed. And those doing it won't quit. Jin-Woo then calmly cleared his throat, and said. Jin-Woo was trying to figure out why Mrs. Selner had come to him. You're here to warn me about something, he asked. Nope, she said, shaking her head hard. Jin-Woo wasn't sure what to make of that. Then Mrs. Selner's expression turned super serious. You have to protect them, she begged. Meanwhile, Thomas was lying in a hospital bed. He slowly opened his eyes. The last thing he remembered was, well, it was all a blur. As he tried to piece things together, 2 words kept echoing in his mind. I've lost. He couldn't believe he was saying that again. It felt weird, like something he never thought he'd admit. The hospital room around him looked familiar but strange at the same time. But for Thomas, being in a hospital wasn't a big deal. He hadn't been in one since, well, not since everything changed. Jin-Woo, on the other hand, had practically lived in hospitals because of his job as a hunter. So while this was normal for Jin-Woo, it felt odd for Thomas. As Thomas lay there trying to remember how he ended up in the hospital, Jin-Woo and Mrs. Selner were having their own tense conversation. You have to protect them, she kept saying, her voice filled with urgency. Jin-Woo started as the lowest of the low in E-rank hunter while Thomas was a top-tier hunter from day one. But now, the tables had totally flipped. Their match left a huge mark on Thomas. I really lost. Thomas felt like his soul had floated right out of his body as he sat there. Talk attack. Someone suddenly stopped typing on their keyboard. Thomas turned to see Laura sitting by his bedside. She was the head manager of Scavenger Guild and kept a respectful distance. Her fingers floated above her laptop keyboard. You're awake, she said. Yeah. Thomas avoided looking directly at her as he rubbed his chin. He checked the length of his beard and felt relieved. It didn't seem like much time had passed. It's been about a day. Laura nodded. Yes, it has. The doctor said he might be sidelined for a few weeks, which shows how serious things were at one point. Now, after just one day, he's awake again. Laura isn't sure if that's totally like him or not. She leaned in closer to him. Should I call the doctor? No, not yet. Thomas shook his head, wincing in pain. He rubbed his sore temples, still feeling the sting from when that man hit him. It hurt so much he didn't want to ever go through it again. Besides, doctors couldn't even help with this kind of pain. What happened to Mr. Huang? Laura opened her mouth to answer, but then closed it again, unsure of what to say. She just shook her head, looking confused. Thomas thought about it for a moment before changing the subject casually. Any other issues? Many hunters were hurt, but they're all better now because the Hunter Command Center acted fast. Thomas's eyes widened in shock. Wait, no one else died? He burst out. The officer nodded. That's right. Thomas let out a deep breath. No deaths after such an intense fight. That could only mean one thing, their opponent had gone easy on them. It was a tough loss for Thomas. He didn't feel sad about losing though. Instead, he was amazed by Jin-Woo. The Korean man didn't just beat Thomas. He also defeated the skilled hunters Thomas had brought along. Thomas felt respect instead of fear. He always believed that having more power meant you were right. So losing like this was a big shock. But even though Thomas had just been beaten, he didn't feel bad about it at all. Maybe it was because he knew there was a big difference in power between him and his opponent. He probably should have been angry or itching for revenge. But instead, Laura popped up and interrupted his thoughts by handing him a small, rectangular case. Thomas looked at Laura with curiosity. Your sunglasses were found at the scene, but they were pretty messed up, she said. Inside the case was a brand new pair of Thomas's favorite shades. He chuckled as he put them on. Thanks for everything, Laura said with a grin, relieved that Thomas didn't explode when he woke up. Instead, he just lay there calmly. Just doing my job, Thomas replied, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. After a moment of silence, he added, make sure Mr. Huang gets an amazing funeral. He was still part of our guild. Laura nodded, jotting down notes. Got it. She looked up when Thomas paused again. Please tell Hunter Sung that I, Thomas Andre, want to say sorry, Thomas said quietly. Protect the hunters, Laura added, determination in her voice. Jin-Woo's eyes widened in surprise. Why me? He asked, puzzled. Mrs. Selner took a deep breath before diving into her story. I had this dream, she said slowly. People in black were chasing these hunters, but I couldn't remember their faces. It was like trying to grab water in my hands. Jin-Woo tilted his head, curious. What makes you think it's connected to me? Mrs. Sellner gave a knowing smile. Let's just say you're the mystery man from my dream. And that's exactly why I need your help. I used my ability in my dream to try and figure out who they really are. Is that why you stared into my eyes last time? Yes. Yes, Mrs. Sellner admitted openly, explaining how she had used her power. Jin-Woo's heart raced as he thought back to their first meeting. What had Mrs. Sellner seen in his eyes that spooked her so much? Jin-Woo pushed aside his curiosity and focused on her. What I saw was incredible power, she said, her voice low and serious. But when our eyes met, I had no choice but to wake up from my dream. Jin-Woo noticed Mrs. Sellner's hands were trembling. I still remember the voice I heard the moment I saw it, she added. The director and Adam both looked nervous now. What did it say? Jin-Woo asked. It told me to go back and quietly wait for the war, she replied. The room felt heavy, like an unanswered question hung in the air. Sellner got a creepy crawly feeling all over when she remembered her dream. The voice in her dream was super clear and gave her chills. It was like nothing she'd ever heard before. But here's the cool part, the words from the dream were a big clue for Jin-Woo. It all matched what the King of Giants had told him about an epic battle coming between the rulers and the monarchs. But the rulers weren't the only ones preparing for battle. The big question was whose side were the creatures from Mrs. Sellner's dreams on? Jin-Woo still hadn't gotten any answers, so he asked again, how does all of this relate to me protecting the hunters? Because it's the same power as the one within you, Hunter sung. Those words hit Jin-Woo like a shockwave. On that day, Mrs. Sellner's mysterious past began to unravel. Sellner had seen the Shadow Monarch's power before, so if she spotted something similar in Jin-Woo's dream killers, there could be only one explanation: they were likely the monarchs. Jin-Woo's face turned serious. Mrs. Sellner quickly kept going, noticing his strange expression. These beings are way stronger than regular hunters, she said. To stop them, we'll need someone just as powerful. The director chimed in. Honestly, we're not entirely sure, but it seems like you might be the only one who can protect the other hunters. Sellner said, but if they had arranged this meeting despite objections, Jin-Woo wondered aloud. Did the Hunter Command Center change their opinion about me after yesterday's fight? When the truth came out, Director Brannon gave an awkward answer. That is correct. It was clear that Jin-Woo was way stronger than other top hunters. The recent incident had given them hope they hadn't felt before. The Hunter Command Center really needed Jin-Woo's help, now more than ever. A top U.S. hunter had already been lost to those creatures, so they had to keep Thomas Andre safe at all costs. You're an amazing hunter, they told him. Of course we'll make it worth your while, if you lend us a hand. They were ready to give Jin-Woo anything he wanted, including Kamish's rune stone, no matter what he asked for. They had stopped bothering Jin-Woo with an offer he'd already turned down. But when Christopher Reed died, they changed their minds and decided the best plan was to ask for his help in protecting the most powerful hunter in the U.S. instead. Jin-Woo hesitated, clearly unsure. Mrs. Sellner laid out what was happening, making it clear why they needed him now more than ever. In this world, there are hunters who have been super lucky. They've been blessed with amazing powers. Up until now, they've used these powers to protect the world from danger. But without them, everything is in big trouble. Jin-Woo had made up his mind. I'm sorry, he said quietly. The director's eyes widened in shock. Jin-Woo's firm decision left no room for argument, and it caught him totally off guard. Is it because you're mad at Hunter Andre? Jin-Woo shook his head. No. It's because I don't know who I'm up against yet. Whoever they were, Jin-Woo had never faced them before. Jin-Woo wasn't someone to make promises he couldn't keep, so he couldn't vow to protect Thomas Andre from this unknown threat. I'll just keep an eye on things for now. He'd do what he could in his own way to handle it. This was the same cool attitude Jin-Woo had shown when he first stepped into that tricky double dungeon. His mindset hadn't changed one bit since then. Plus, Jin-Woo had tons of shadow soldiers who kept him informed. If he stationed one with every hunter the Hunter Command Center was watching, he could act fast whenever trouble popped up. If that's all. With a solid plan in his head, Jin-Woo stood up from his seat. Meanwhile, back in South Korea, President Go had had quite the eventful day. The day before the International Guild Conference, things had gotten heated between Jin-Woo and Thomas during an intense fight. President Go had been worried sick, so he'd asked the Hunter Command Center for more details. After a while they got back to him with good news. The Scavenger Guild was to blame, and Jin-Woo wouldn't get in any trouble. Phew, President Go sighed, finally able to relax. The thought of Jin-Woo ending up in an American prison had given him quite a scare. But wait a second. Who could even hold Jin-Woo back? He'd taken down Thomas Andre, one of the toughest players around. President Go burst out laughing at the idea. I guess I was worried for nothing. He chuckled to himself, laughing so hard his throat felt dry. A bottle of water sat on a side table, a little farther from his desk. President Go gazed at it quietly, then stretched out his hand. The water bottle zoomed through the air, and he caught it with ease, like he'd done it a million times before. He smiled as he unscrewed the lid. Director Woo will definitely have some interesting news when he comes back. He. It was a smart move to send Jinchul, with Jin-Woo to the US. Later that night, boss, Jin-Ho rushed over, tears in his eyes, trying to give Jin-Woo a big hug. But Jin-Woo dodged him easily. He raised an eyebrow at Jinchul, who had offered to watch Jin-Ho while Jin-Woo was at the conference. What's going on with him? He asked. Jinchul held up the newspaper he'd been reading. I showed this to him when he woke up. The front page had photos of the beaten-up Scavenger Guild members, and a picture of Thomas, who was covered in blood and unconscious. Jin-Woo thought saving Gino was no big deal, but Gino only found out what happened by reading the article. Who would have believed that someone would take on the strongest guild in the world and its terrifying leader, Thomas Goliath Andre, just to save Gino's life? Gino's eyes welled up with tears when he saw Jin-Woo, and he couldn't hold back his emotions. Ibu, ooze. Jin-Woo dodged Gino's hug again, his movements lightning fast. Gino tried his best to catch him, but Jin-Woo was way too quick. His agility was even better than an S-rank hunter's. Finally Jin-Woo stopped and raised an eyebrow at Jinchul, pointing a thumb back at Jinyo. Are you saying he read the article in English? Oh, Jinchul replied with a grin. The interpreter from the association felt bad, because she wasn't doing much work. So I had her translate the article for Hunter Yu. Jin-Woo nodded thoughtfully. Meanwhile Jinyo looked a bit upset. His nose was even turning red. He clearly wasn't happy about being dodged all this time. Boss. Jin-Woo quickly handed Jinyo a tissue. Jinyo took it and blew his nose loudly. Unks. Jin-Woo could tell how upset Jinyo was, but he also didn't want him to get snot all over the fancy suit he'd brought for the conference. After a moment, Jinyo calmed down a bit and wiped away his tears. Hey, boss, he said. When did you learn English? Oz. Jin-Woo raised an eyebrow. Apparently Jinyo had still been half aware of their conversation with Thomas even while passing out. Oh, I had a lot of free time when I was a low-rank hunter. Jin-Woo explained, back when I wasn't busy with raids or anything. So I figured, why not teach myself some English? Never thought it'd actually come in handy like this. He chuckled to himself, thinking about how weird it felt to use those old lessons now. But he never could have imagined that his very first English conversation would be with Thomas Andre. Oh yeah. Jin-Woo nodded, feeling a lump in his throat, thinking about Jin-Woo's past. It meant even more to him how loyal Jin-Woo was. Jin-Woo had been willing to take on the entire Scavenger Guild just to save him, someone who was only a D-rank hunter. Jin-Woo got choked up all over again. Boss, no matter what, I believe in you, and I'll stick with you, no matter where we go. His eyes turned red, and his nose started running again. Jin-Woo smiled, but, this super sharp perception stat is annoying. It makes him way too sensitive to Jinyo's emotions. And now he's getting emotional too. He glanced at Jinchul to distract himself from Jinyo. Can he go now? Yes. Hunter Yu's doctor was shocked that his injuries healed completely overnight. Alright, let's get him discharged and head to the hotel. The Hunter Command Center has a car waiting for us, someone said. Understood. I'll get ready, boss. Jinyo started packing, his eyes puffy from crying. Jin-Woo watched him with a warm smile, relieved that his friend was safe. But deep down he still felt angry and bitter toward the person responsible for everything that had happened. Greed. You know what to do when we go back to the hotel, right? Yes, my king. As they left the hospital, Jin-Woo tried to comfort Greed by letting him know he'd only have to take on his role for 2 hours this time. The Hunter Command Center had sent not one but 2 cars for them. Jin-Woo stepped into the first car because he wanted to talk about something personal with Adam. Jinyo, on the other hand, hopped into the second car with those two people from the Hunters Association. Jin-Woo opened the door of his car. Clack. Adam was asleep, leaning his head against the window. When the door creaked open, he twitched a little and shook off the sleep. "Hey, you're here," Hunter Sung, Adam said, looking pretty tired, but perking up as soon as Jin-Woo arrived. Beat from exhaustion. He had dark circles under his eyes that looked like they could use a week of sleep. Jin-Woo glanced over at him with sympathy as the driver pulled out into traffic. Then, right to the point, Jin-Woo asked, "Can I get a list of the hunters I'm supposed to protect?" The question snapped Adam wide awake, and a surge of energy lit up his face. "Have you changed your mind?" "No. I'm just curious." "Oh, odd." Adam looked a bit down, but it wasn't all bad news. At least Jin-Woo was interested. Adam grinned. "I'll make you that list as soon as I get back to the Hunter Command Center." Odd. Jin-Woo glanced at his watch. It was already 9 o'clock at night. Was it his imagination, or did Adam look even more exhausted than he had just a few minutes ago? The agent appeared like he was fighting to stay awake. Jin-Woo couldn't take it anymore and reached across the seat. "Huh?" Adam's voice squeaked nervously as Jin-Woo cupped his hand over Adam's eyes. "Hunter Sung." Adam's body tensed up at Jin-Woo's orders. "Stay still, okay?" This was super weird. Jin-Woo, the guy who'd almost beaten Thomas Andre to a pulp, was now doing this to him. Adam gripped the armrests tightly, his heart racing like crazy. Jin-Woo tilted Adam's head back and dripped some liquid from a small bottle into his mouth. "What the heck is this?" Adam freaked out, not knowing what he was being forced to drink with his eyes covered. But as the strange liquid slid down his throat, Adam felt a sudden burst of energy. When Jin-Woo took his hand away from Adam's face, the American realized something amazing. The sleepiness he'd been feeling was totally gone. Instead, his body felt light as air and super fresh, like he'd just jumped out of bed after the best night's sleep ever. Hunter Sung was suddenly full of energy, like he'd never been tired at all. "Hatch Hunter Sung." Adam stared at him in confusion. "How did you do this?" Jin-Woo just shrugged, and gave a mischievous grin. "It's a secret." Adam nodded, though his eyes still looked shocked. He stretched his arms and moved around, clearly amazed. "Hunter Sung," he started, his voice mixing amazement with disbelief. "I feel like you'd be awesome at anything you tried, even if you weren't a hunter," Adam said. His praise seemed a bit much, especially since he was a top agent who could speak more than 10 languages. Still, Jin-Woo couldn't help but grin at how happy his words made Adam. Plus it made things easier for him to ask for help later. The list of hunters needing his protection was just the start. "Could you also set up a meeting with them?" he asked. This would be the perfect chance for Adam to have someone from his team secretly watch over each hunter, protecting them from the Monarchs' attacks. But Adam simply shook his head. Jin-Woo was worried. Even though the Hunter Command Center was super powerful, he wasn't sure they could get everyone together in time. Jin-Woo frowned. "I guess that's just too tough," he said, but then Adam smiled and said, "You're looking at this the wrong way." He went on to explain the last item on the meeting list. "It's called Night of the Hunters," Adam said with a grin. "The Hunter Command Center throws this huge party for all the hunters at the conference. You can come if you want. It's a great way to meet everyone." A party. Perfect. It was the ideal setup for casually meeting the hunters he needed to assign shadow soldiers. Jin-Woo cracked a grin. Perfect. He could use the hunters to get closer to the Monarchs, figure out who was friend or foe, and then decide who to take on, and how. "Sounds good," Jin-Woo said, leaning back in his seat as the car cruised into the American night. Inside a massive banquet hall that could hold 1,500 people, the world's top hunters, and their entourages, had gathered for the Night of the Hunters. Jin-Woo stared in awe at the legendary hunters he'd only seen on TV before. Meanwhile, those same hunters were eyeing Jin-Woo with just as much curiosity. As soon as he stepped into the hall, everyone's eyes locked onto him. It was like the whole room had been waiting just for his entrance. "Whoa, look over there," someone whispered, though it wasn't like anyone could miss him. "I see him," another voice replied, calm, but clearly amazed. "He's right in front of us, but I can barely feel anything from him," someone else muttered. "This guy's on a whole different level." Jin-Woo, standing beside him, was getting almost as much attention. People were buzzing with questions and theories about who he was, and what brought him here. "So, the guy next to him," someone started, their voice filled with curiosity. Is that the one Hunter Sung fought Thomas to rescue? Another person guessed, tying it all back to the statement, released by the Hunter Command Center earlier that day. Everyone was amazed when Jin-Woo decided to challenge the entire scavenger guild to save his D-ranked teammate. This bold move proved he wasn't kidding on that first day of the conference when he said, "I'll protect my family no matter what, even if it means going against all other hunters." People saw the shocking photos from the battle with the scavenger guild, and hoped Jin-Woo wouldn't have to follow through on his promise. Now that everything was out in the open, everyone was eager to talk to him, and figure out what would happen next. At first, people saw Jin-Woo as a scary giant, who had defeated Goliath, but now they thought of him as a hero who had saved his friend. The first person to step forward and introduce himself was the boss of a company that dealt with magic creature remains. "It's an honor to meet you, Hunter Sung," he said with a smile. "I'm looking to buy the bodies of those giant magical creatures. Got a second? Giants are super rare because they usually appear as bosses in tough dungeons, and their bodies hardly ever stay intact." The chairman saw a great chance to expand his business, and quickly reached out. Jin-Woo gave a friendly smile as he introduced Jin-Yo to the chairman. "Raids, that's my area. My right-hand guy Jin-Hyo here handles all the business stuff." "Is that right?" Jin-Hyo beamed with pride, puffed up his chest, and held out his hand for a handshake. "I'm Jin-Hyo Yu, Vice President of Ajing Guild. Nice to meet you," Jin-Woo said with a grin. "I don't usually talk business in situations like this," Jin-Woo began, "but I'll make an exception for you." A smile spread across Jin-Woo's face, as he watched Jin-Hyo guide the chairman to a quiet spot to chat. "He's totally acting like a pro now. Us with those two busy elsewhere." Jin-Woo turned his attention back to why he was here in the first place. Just then Adam walked up to him. "Check this out." Adam passed Jin-Woo a small screen that listed the top 10 hunters in the world. "These are the best of the best, ranked by their scores." Jin-Woo scanned the list quickly. It was weird, seeing someone's whole career boiled down to numbers. Then he noticed something he wasn't on it. "Wait a second," Jin-Woo said, frowning. "Where am I on this list?" Adam chuckled and pointed between two names. "If we count what you did with those giant magic beasts, you'd probably land somewhere right here." Zhigang Liu, Thomas Andre, and Christopher Reed led the pack. So having his name right after them, even with a shorter career, meant he was doing super well. Siddharth Bachchan from India came in fourth. The top 5 were all big-time hunters, and those below were really tough too. Then something caught Jin-Woo's attention, breaking his focus on the list. The hunters looked puzzled when someone unexpected showed up. Jin-Woo noticed the stranger and handed the tablet back to Adam. "Pass Hunter Sung," he started to say. "Don't worry," Jin-Woo replied calmly. As expected, the newcomer walked straight toward Jin-Woo without hesitating. Jin tried to step in, but the man pushed him aside like it was no big deal. Soon, the stranger stood right in front of Jin-Woo, and took off his sunglasses, revealing a cool expression. "Thomas Andre," he said. Everyone around them felt tense as they watched Jin-Woo and Thomas face off. Jin-Woo looked calm as ever, while Thomas had a bandage on his arm, adding to the drama of the moment. Thomas towered over Jin-Woo, his tall frame making him look down at the younger hunter. "Hunter Jin-Woo Sung, I have something to ask you," he said, his voice calm but curious. Jin-Woo found it weird that Thomas would want to talk to him, especially since Thomas didn't seem hostile, just serious. "What is it?" Jin-Woo asked. Thomas held up his left arm, which was wrapped in bandages. "This arm,"